Alda is one of those rare television legends whose name carries weight even decades after his defining role ended. When people think of MASH Asterisk, they think of him. Hawkeye Pierce wasn't just a character. He was the heart of the show, a clever, compassionate, razor-sharp army surgeon whose moral compass grounded the chaos of war. But what most fans didn't realize at the time was that Alda wasn't simply showing up to act. He was shaping the very soul of the series from behind the scenes. His influence was everywhere, in the writing, the directing, and the tone of each episode. And that kind of power isn't handed out easily. It's earned. By the time MASH Asterisk had hit its stride, Alda had become one of the show's most trusted creative forces. But as the show's success grew, so did the expectations and the tensions. While Alda maintained a reputation as the calm center of the storm, not everything behind the scenes was as smooth as the final product suggested. The show had a rotating cast of directors, many of whom were experienced, respected, and sometimes just as opinionated as the actors they were directing. That created a delicate dynamic, especially when those directors didn't fully understand the culture Alda and the rest of the cast had built. Everyone assumed the MASH Asterisk set was a perfect haven of collaboration, and for the most part, it was. But there were moments that tested those relationships, moments when leadership and ego collided and something had to give. Allen wasn't the kind of guy who played power games, at least not in the way most people in Hollywood did. His influence didn't come from shouting or demanding. It came from consistency, vision, and an unwillingness to compromise the integrity of the work. But being the moral compass of a show like MASH Asterisk also came with unspoken responsibilities. People started looking to him not just as an actor, but as a de facto leader on set. And sometimes that line between colleague and commander got blurry. This is where the story takes a turn. Because even someone as universally respected as Alan Alda had his limits. And when one particular director walked onto the set and expected Alda to play peacekeeper, things didn't go the way anyone expected. What came next was a quiet but significant clash, one that challenged the myth of the perfectly harmonious MASH Asterisk set and exposed the real cost of being both the face and the spine of a cultural phenomenon. Allen's clash with this director didn't erupt in shouting matches or heated debates. Instead, it played out with subtle tension, sharp decisions, and a firm refusal to be anyone's manager except his own. At 89, Alda finally shared the full story, and it changes how we see not only him, but the entire dynamic behind one of the most beloved shows in television history. It started with a simple conversation. At least, that's how it probably looked from the outside. Jackie Cooper had just arrived to direct an episode of MASH Star, a seasoned actor and director in his own right. Cooper carried the kind of old-school confidence that didn't ask permission. It expected deference. On most TV sets, a director like that would be treated with a certain level of respect, even submission. But MASH Asterisk wasn't just any TV set. It was a tightly knit ensemble with its own rhythm, its own language, and a deep bond forged over years of shared work. At the center of that world was Alan Alda, not just a star, but the unofficial guardian of its culture. So when Cooper pulled Alda aside, what came next didn't land the way he expected. Cooper had noticed tensions among some of the cast members. To him, it looked like things were getting out of hand, emotions flaring, professionalism slipping. Maybe that was true. Or maybe, like so many outsiders, he just didn't understand how closely the cast worked, how their arguments were often just passionate bursts of creative energy. Either way, he made a decision. Alda should step in, not as an actor, not even as a co-director, but as a manager, a referee, a disciplinarian. In other words, Cooper wanted Alda to sit the other actors down and straighten them out. That suggestion didn't sit well. Alan Alda may have been many things, collaborative, thoughtful, respected, but he was never the kind of person who wanted to control others. He believed in organic chemistry, in letting people work through their issues naturally, not under pressure or fear. To Alda, the idea of pulling rank on his castmates felt like a betrayal of the very environment he'd helped build. And more than that, it wasn't his job. He wasn't the director, he wasn't producer, and he certainly wasn't anyone's boss. He was an actor, part of a team, and he didn't like what Cooper's request implied, that he was above the rest. Instead of engaging in a long debate, Alda did something surprising. He quietly removed himself. When tensions ran high, he'd go to his dressing room, not to sulk, not to dodge responsibility, but to give space, to allow things to breathe, to avoid fueling fires. It was his way of keeping the peace without crossing lines. And when Cooper pressed him again, Alda was direct. "I don't do that," he said. There was no drama in the way he said it, just finality. He wasn't going to lecture his friends or police their behavior. He wasn't going to let someone turn him into something he wasn't. To Cooper, it may have felt like defiance, but to Alda, it was integrity. He knew where he stood, and more importantly, where he wouldn't stand. In that moment, a quiet standoff began, one that wouldn't explode, but would linger in the memory of both men for years. Alan Alda wasn't the type to raise his voice or throw his weight around. That wasn't his style. Instead, when he faced uncomfortable moments, like the confrontation with Jackie Cooper, he leaned on calm confidence and conviction. After all, by the time the situation unfolded, Alda had earned his place not just as a face of MASH asterisk, but as someone whose word held real gravity. And still, when faced with a director trying to hand him responsibility for a cast conflict, Alda didn't puff up his chest or challenge authority. What he did instead was far more deliberate and far more revealing. Rather than accept the role of peacekeeper, Alda made a choice that cut straight to the core of who he was. He refused, not rudely, not angrily, but with clarity. "I don't do that," he told Cooper. Just 5 words, but they said everything. He wasn't being difficult. He was setting a boundary, a strong one, and that boundary wasn't just about him. It was about protecting the cast, the tone of the show, and the trust they'd all built together over years of working side by side. Alda knew the trap. If he stepped into the role Cooper was suggesting, he'd become something different in the eyes of his fellow actors. No longer one of them, an equal, a collaborator, but a figure of authority, someone whose word could now come with pressure. That wasn't the energy MASH asterisk was built on. The camaraderie among the cast wasn't just about friendly banter on screen. It was about equality off-screen. That's why Alda had always gone out his way to avoid drawing lines between himself and the others, even though he had more influence than most. Accepting Cooper's request would have destroyed that dynamic in an instant. So instead of stepping in, Alda stepped back. He removed himself from the drama, not because he didn't care, but because he knew that jumping in would only complicate things. Sometimes he'd quietly leave the set. Other times, he'd retreat to his dressing room, not as an act of protest, but as a way to cool the temperature of the room, to give people space to decompress without adding more voices to the mix. And slowly it worked. The cast would resolve things naturally, the tension would ease, and no damage would be done to the sense of unity that defined the show. But Alda didn't stop there. He made it clear to Cooper that directing didn't mean handing off uncomfortable responsibilities to someone else. He stood up, not just for himself, but for the entire team. And in doing so, he sent a message. Respect wasn't about control. It was about trust. Trust in each other. Trust in the process. Trust that even when things got messy, they could handle it without anyone pulling rank. That moment didn't make headlines. There was no explosive confrontation. But in hindsight, it revealed something profound about Alda's quiet strength. To truly understand what made this clash between Alan Alda and Jackie Cooper so quietly significant, you have to look beyond the surface. At first glance, it might seem like a small disagreement, an actor declining a director's request. But the layers beneath it reveal much more about the culture of MASH asterisk, the power dynamics on set, and the way Alda viewed leadership. This wasn't about one moment. It was about a mindset, about drawing a line in the sand that protected something sacred. The fragile trust between castmates, the emotional safety on set, and the long-term health of their collaboration. What made MASH asterisk special wasn't just its writing or performances. It was a chemistry. The feeling that the people on screen weren't just acting together. They were living those moments. That kind of connection doesn't happen by accident. It takes years of trust, unspoken understanding, and mutual respect. And it can be shattered in an instant if one person breaks the code. That's what Alda was guarding. He knew that if he stepped into a disciplinary role, even just once, It could shift the dynamic permanently. People might second-guess their words around him. They might hold back. They might wonder if he was observing them as a peer or judging them as a leader. It would be the end of the openness they'd fought to maintain. And Jackie Cooper, well-intentioned or not, didn't understand that. His approach was traditional, hierarchical. Someone needs to lead. Someone needs to correct the others. And if it's not going to be him, why not the star of the show? To Cooper, it was a logical request. But to Alda, it was fundamentally out of step with the way MASH Asterisk operated. It wasn't about logic. It was about ethos. The emotional glue that held everything together. Disrupt that, and the show would lose something irreplaceable. What's most interesting is how Alda handled the fallout. He didn't hold a grudge. He didn't trash Cooper behind his back or stir resentment among the crew. He simply stood firm, made his values clear, and moved on. That's a rare kind of maturity, especially in an industry where egos and politics run rampant. And that quiet refusal spoke volumes, not just to Cooper, but to everyone watching. It reinforced a message. This set wasn't like others. And Alda wasn't just a star. He was a cultural backbone of production. Years later, Alda would reflect on the moment not with bitterness, but with a kind of quiet pride. Not because he won some power struggle, but because he protected the thing that mattered most. The people, the relationships, the honesty. That's what leadership looked like to him. Not authority, but care. After Alan Alda's quiet refusal to take on the role of disciplinarian, something subtle but powerful shifted on the set of MASH Star. Not in a way that disrupted the show's production, but in the energy among the cast and crew. Word got around quickly. People noticed. Alda hadn't made a scene, but his choice set a tone. It reminded everyone that the harmony on set wasn't going to be maintained through top-down authority. It was built from mutual respect, and it would only survive if everyone guarded it together. His stance didn't divide the cast. It united them. Jackie Cooper, on the other hand, continued to direct a few episodes. He wasn't shut out or blacklisted, but the boundaries had been made clear. The cast remained courteous, professional, but there was a difference, a slight coolness. Not out of anger, but out of caution. Cooper had exposed a fundamental misunderstanding of how things work behind the scenes, and that didn't just fade overnight. Directors who came in later took note, too. No one again tried to enlist Alda in managing the cast. That door had been closed, and in closing it, Alda protected not just himself, but the entire creative process. The interesting thing is that this tension never spilled into the final product. Viewers watching episodes directed by Cooper never saw a dip in quality. That a testament to the professionalism of everyone involved. The work was still done, and done well. But behind the scenes, Alda's quiet stand had sent a lasting message. This was a place where collaboration ruled, not hierarchy. And that message carried through the remaining years of the show. As MASH Asterisk approached its final seasons, Alda's influence only grew. Not because he demanded more control, but because his vision had proven itself over and over. He directed more episodes. He took on writing duties. And still, he never let that increase in responsibility change how he related to his castmates. The same guy who refused to lecture others at the request of a visiting director continued to treat every person on set, from co-stars to crew members, as equals. That consistency was rare. It wasn't performative. It was who he was. Years later, when cast members were asked about the show's lasting success, many pointed not just to the writing or the cultural relevance, but to the atmosphere, the feeling that they were part of something bigger than a TV show. That sense of unity and care, many agreed, came from Alda's example. And it all traced back to moments like the one with Cooper, moments where he could have chosen control, but instead chose principle. Even decades after MASH Asterisk ended, that story lingered, not because it was dramatic or explosive, but because it revealed the kind of leader Alda truly was. After decades of quiet reflection, Alan Alda chose to break his silence at 89, and the timing itself is as revealing as the story he finally shared. For years, Alda had carried a memory of that defining moment with Jackie Cooper, not as a source of regret, but as a reminder of the values that had guided him throughout his career. In a world that often prizes polished legends and sanitized memories, his decision to recount that clashed decades later speaks volumes about his commitment to truth, integrity, and the unvarnished realities behind the magic of television. Alda's retelling comes at a time when audiences are increasingly drawn to behind-the-scenes revelations and the complexities of interpersonal dynamics in classic shows. He recognized that fans, much like he once did, are curious about the real stories that shaped iconic moments. Yet, instead of dramatic confession or vindictive account, his narrative is measured and reflective. It is a mature testimony to the idea that leadership isn't about asserting control, but about preserving the spirit of collaboration even in the face of authority. This truth had guided him on set and remains relevant today. By speaking out, Alda also offered a counter-narrative to the pervasive myth of infallible icons. For too long, public figures have been depicted as flawless paragons of wisdom and grace. But his story reminds us that even those we revere are human. They have their own battles, their private moments of conflict, and their reasons for maintaining boundaries. His choice to resist the traditional hierarchy on the MASH asterisk set wasn't an act of defiance. It was an affirmation of the belief that respect must be mutual and that control should never come at the expense of personal freedom and creative integrity. Moreover, Alda's late disclosure is a testament to the power of time. It took decades for him to feel that the story was ready to be told, not as a means to settle old scores, but to share a lesson that only hindsight can provide. His journey with Parkinson's has perhaps deepened his understanding of vulnerability and the necessity to be honest about one's limitations and the importance of standing up for those principles in everyday life. In this context, his recollection of the incident is both a personal catharsis and a public service, encouraging others to consider the quiet moments of resistance that often go unnoticed. In sharing his experience now, Alda does more than merely recount a moment of tension on a television set. He reveals the complexities that underline our cultural myths. His voice, softened by age yet sharpened by a lifetime of experience, challenges us to reconsider how we view our heroes. Leaders, he suggests, are not defined by their ability to control every situation, but by their willingness to step aside when doing so preserves the integrity of the collective. And that, ultimately, is the most inspiring part of his legacy, a reminder that courage is found not in domination, but in the strength to let the truth shine through, even after all these years. And just like that, at 89 years old, Alan Alda pulled back the curtain on a story that had never made headlines, but said everything about who he really is. Not just a beloved actor, but a man of principle, loyalty, and quiet strength. In an industry where egos often take center stage, Alda's refusal to control others wasn't just rare, it was revolutionary. If you found this story as eye-opening as we did, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more, and turn on notifications so you never miss a drop of the drama. Until next time.